They promised salvation, they delivered silence. In the span of 2 years, 283 children walked through the doors of Missouri's Reformed Quietist chapels and never walked out. Tonight we uncover the doctrine that erased them, the pastors who buried the truth, and the one diary that reveals what really happened in those basement chambers where flesh was silenced and spirits were conducted away. The autumn of 1871 arrived in Callaway County with an unsettling stillness. The Missouri River wound through farmland where cornstalks stood like silent sentinels, their golden husks rustling in the cool October breeze. In the small settlement of Mocaine, population barely 300, the sound of children's laughter had grown conspicuously absent. Margaret Whitmore pressed her face against the cold window pane of her modest farmhouse, watching the dirt road that led to the Reformed Quietist Chapel of Sacred Silence. Her breath fogged the glass as she strained to see any sign of her 8-year-old son, Thomas, who had been taken to the spiritual retreat 3 weeks prior. "Still no word from Pastor Ezekiel?" asked her husband, Samuel, setting down his coffee cup with trembling hands. The ceramic clinked against the wooden table, a sound that seemed to echo in their eerily quiet home. Margaret shook her head, her dark hair catching the lamplight. "He says Thomas is progressing well in his spiritual journey, that speaking would corrupt his purification process." Her voice cracked on the last words. Samuel stood and placed a weathered hand on his wife's shoulder. "3 weeks without hearing our boy's voice, Margaret. This ain't natural, this ain't Christian." The Reformed Quietist Chapel of Sacred Silence had appeared in Mocaine 2 years earlier, in the spring of 1869. Pastor Ezekiel Thornfield, a tall, gaunt man with piercing gray eyes and a voice like winter wind, had arrived with promises of salvation for the children of Missouri's farming communities. His doctrine was simple, yet absolute. Children's souls were closest to God, but their flesh was corrupted by worldly desires. Only through complete silence, prolonged fasting, and isolation could their spirits be purified. Parents, desperate to secure their children's place in heaven during these uncertain times following the Civil War, had embraced the pastor's teachings. The chapel's basement had been converted into individual meditation chambers, where children as young as 6 would spend weeks in contemplative silence. Margaret remembered the first time she'd seen Pastor Thornfield. He had stood at the pulpit, his black coat hanging loose on his skeletal frame, speaking of children who had achieved such spiritual purity that they had been translated to a higher realm of existence, no longer requiring earthly forms. "The flesh must be silenced," he had intoned, his voice carrying across the packed chapel. "The spirit must be conducted away from this valley of shadows." Now, as Margaret stared at the chapel's whitewashed walls gleaming in the moonlight, those words felt like ice in her veins. A knock at the door made both parents jump. Samuel opened it to find their neighbor, Ruth Henderson, her face pale and drawn. In her hands she clutched a worn shawl that belonged to her daughter, Emma. They told me Emma has been elevated," Ruth whispered, her voice barely audible. "Pastor Thornfield says she's achieved such purity that she no longer needs to return to us, that she's been chosen for a higher calling." Margaret's heart pounded. "What do you mean, elevated?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "He says she's been sent north to spread the word of the sacred silence. But Margaret, I found this shawl buried behind the chapel. It's torn, and there's..." She paused, her voice breaking. "There's blood on it." The 3 adults stood in the doorway, the weight of unspoken fears heavy between them. In the distance, the chapel bell tolled midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the sleeping settlement like a funeral dirge. Samuel grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "I'm going to that chapel. I'm bringing Thomas home." "Samuel, no." Margaret caught his arm. "You've seen what happens to those who question the pastor's methods. The Millers asked too many questions about their twin boys, and now they've been shunned by the entire community. Their farm's been boycotted. They're starving." Ruth nodded grimly. "Pastor Thornfield has 3 other chapels in the county: Sacred Silence in Mocaine, Divine Quiet in Fulton, and Blessed Muteness in Kingdom City. All the families there follow his doctrine. Anyone who speaks against him is branded a heretic." As if summoned by their conversation, a figure emerged from the shadows near the chapel. Pastor Thornfield himself, walking slowly down the dirt road, his black coat billowing in the night breeze. His pale face seemed to glow in the moonlight as he approached their home. "Brother Samuel, Sister Margaret," he called out, his voice carrying an otherworldly calm. I sense disturbance in your hearts. Doubt is the devil's whisper. Samuel stepped protectively in front of his wife. Pastor, we just want to see our boy. It's been 3 weeks. Pastor Thornfield's gray eyes fixed on Samuel with an intensity that made the farmer's skin crawl. Young Thomas is undergoing a beautiful transformation. His spirit is learning to separate from the corruptions of flesh. To interrupt this process now would be catastrophic for his eternal soul. What does that mean? Margaret demanded, stepping beside her husband despite her fear. It means, Sister Margaret, that Thomas is being prepared for a journey. A sacred journey that will take him far from the temptations of this world. The pastor's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. You should be grateful. Your son has been chosen. Ruth Henderson spoke up, her voice shaking. Chosen for what? Where is my Emma? Where are the Sullivan children? The Morrison boy? We haven't seen any of them in weeks. Pastor Thornfield's expression darkened. Sister Ruth, your lack of faith troubles me. These children have been blessed with a calling higher than your earthly understanding can comprehend. They have been conducted away. Conducted away where? Samuel's voice rose, his patience finally snapping. The pastor stepped closer, and Samuel caught a strange scent. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. There are realms beyond this world, Brother Samuel. Realms where the pure of spirit can exist without the burden of flesh. Your children are pioneering a new form of existence. Margaret felt bile rise in her throat. You're talking about death. I'm talking about transcendence. Pastor Thornfield's voice remained eerily calm. The sacred silence doctrine teaches us that the highest form of worship is the complete surrender of earthly attachment. Your children are learning this lesson. A scream pierced the night air, high, desperate, and quickly cut short. It came from the direction of the chapel basement. All 4 adults froze. The sound had lasted only seconds, but it was unmistakably the voice of a child in distress. What was that? Ruth whispered. Pastor Thornfield's composure never wavered. The sound of a soul being freed from its earthly prison. Sister Henderson, I believe that was your Emma, achieving her final elevation. Ruth Henderson collapsed to her knees, her anguished sobs echoing across the silent settlement. Margaret grabbed Samuel's arm as he started toward the chapel. Let me go, Margaret. I'm getting our son. But Pastor Thornfield stepped into his path. Brother Samuel, I would not recommend that course of action. The other families in our network have learned the wisdom of patience. The doctrine of sacred silence has spread to communities throughout Missouri. We have believers in Jefferson City, Columbia, and even St. Louis now. Those who oppose us find themselves isolated. The threat was clear. Samuel looked at his wife's terrified face, then at Ruth Henderson weeping in the dirt, and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. How many children are in those basement chambers, Pastor? Enough to fill God's army, came the cryptic reply. Tomorrow, I depart for our chapel in Kingdom City. Brother Matthias has prepared another group of young souls for their journey. By week's end, we will have completed our quota. Quota? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Pastor Thornfield's gray eyes gleamed in the moonlight. 283 children, Sister Margaret. The number revealed to me in divine vision. The precise number needed to open the pathway between worlds. He turned and walked back toward the chapel, his black coat disappearing into the shadows. Before he vanished entirely, his voice drifted back to them on the night wind. The flesh must be silenced. The spirit must be conducted away. The time of translation is at hand. Margaret Whitmore stood in her doorway, watching the chapel where her son was imprisoned, knowing that tomorrow might bring his elevation to whatever realm Pastor Thornfield had prepared for the children of Missouri. In the distance, the chapel bell tolled once more, and Margaret could swear she heard the faint echo of children's voices, not singing, but weeping. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Kingdom City as Samuel Whitmore rode his aging mare toward the Reformed Quietist Chapel of Blessed Muteness. He had left Margaret at dawn, promising to return with answers, or with Thomas, regardless of the consequences. The chapel in Kingdom City was larger than the one in Mocaine, its white clapboard walls stretching toward a bell tower that seemed to pierce the gray October sky. As Samuel dismounted, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Children's shoes. Dozens of them arranged in neat rows beside the chapel's entrance as if their owners had simply walked inside and never returned. "Can I help you, brother?" Samuel turned to find a man in his 50s wearing the simple black garb of the Reformed Quietist clergy. His face was kind, but his eyes held the same unsettling intensity Samuel had seen in Pastor Thornfield. "I'm looking for Pastor Matthias," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his stomach. "I am Brother Matthias," the man replied with a slight bow. "You must be Brother Samuel Whitmore from Mocane. Pastor Thornfield sent word of your concerns." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I want to see my son." Of course. But first, let me show you something that might ease your troubled heart." Brother Matthias gestured toward the chapel. "Come. See the beautiful work we're doing here." Against his better judgment, Samuel followed the pastor inside. The chapel was eerily quiet, with rows of empty pews facing an altar draped in black cloth. The air smelled of incense and something else, something Samuel couldn't identify, but that made his skin crawl. "Where is everyone?" Samuel asked. "The children are in their chambers, undergoing purification," Brother Matthias explained, leading Samuel toward a door behind the altar. "The adults? Well, they've learned to trust in the wisdom of silence." As they descended wooden stairs into the chapel's basement, Samuel's heart began to race. The basement was divided into a series of small rooms, each with a heavy wooden door marked with a child's name. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the wooden floor. "Sarah Morrison," Samuel read from one of the doors, "age 7. He tried the handle, but it was locked. "Each child has their own meditation chamber," Brother Matthias explained. "They fast, they pray, they prepare their spirits for the journey ahead." Samuel moved to the next door. "Emma Henderson, age 9. His voice broke as he recognized the name of Ruth's daughter. "Ah, yes. Little Emma achieved her elevation just last night. Such a blessed child." "What do you mean, elevation?" Samuel demanded, spinning to face the pastor. Brother Matthias smiled, and Samuel noticed that several of his teeth were missing. "She transcended, Brother Samuel. Her spirit was conducted away to join the eternal silence." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. "You're talking about murder?" "I'm talking about salvation." The pastor's voice never wavered. "These children are chosen, Brother Samuel, chosen to break the barriers between this world and the next. Their sacrifice opens the pathway for all of us." Samuel backed away from the man, his mind reeling. "How many children are down here?" 47 in this chapel alone," Brother Matthias said proudly. "Combined with our chapels in Mocane, Fulton, and the new one in Columbia, we have nearly completed our sacred number." 283, Samuel whispered, remembering Pastor Thornfield's words. "Precisely. The number revealed in divine vision. When the final child achieves elevation, the pathway will open permanently. The living will be able to commune directly with the realm of eternal silence." Samuel felt sick. "And if they don't elevate naturally?" Brother Matthias's expression grew stern. "Brother Samuel, doubt is the enemy of faith. Some children require assistance in releasing their earthly bonds. We provide that assistance out of love." A soft sound echoed through the basement. A child's whimper, quickly stifled. Samuel's blood turned to ice. "That's coming from this room," he said, pointing to a door marked Thomas Whitmore, age 8. "Your son is progressing beautifully," Brother Matthias assured him. "Just this morning, he stopped asking for food. His spirit is learning to reject the needs of flesh." Samuel lunged for the door, but Brother Matthias caught his arm with surprising strength. "I cannot allow you to interrupt his purification process. It would doom his soul to eternal damnation." "Let me go," Samuel snarled. But the pastor's grip tightened. "Brother Samuel, I understand your earthly attachment to the boy, but you must understand, Thomas is no longer yours. He belongs to the sacred silence now, as do all the children in our care." The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and footsteps echoed down the wooden steps. Pastor Thornfield appeared, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim light from above. "Brother Samuel," he said with that same otherworldly calm, "I told you that questioning our methods would be unwise. Samuel looked between the two men, realizing he was trapped. "You're both insane. These children have families, people who love them. They have something more important now," Pastor Thornfield replied. "They have purpose. Divine purpose." The pastor pulled a small leather-bound journal from his coat. "Would you like to see the progress we've made? The beautiful transformations we've facilitated?" Against his will, Samuel found himself looking at the journal as Pastor Thornfield opened it. The pages were filled with careful handwriting, documenting the elevations of dozens of children. Mary Sullivan, age 6. Achieved transcendence on the 15th day of fasting. Her final words, "I can see the light." Samuel's stomach lurched as he read entry after entry, each one documenting a child's slow death from starvation, dehydration, or worse. James Morrison, age 10, required assistance in releasing earthly bonds, conducted away peacefully in his sleep. "You're documenting murder," Samuel whispered. "We're documenting miracles," Pastor Thornfield corrected. "Each child who achieves elevation brings us closer to opening the pathway. And Brother Samuel?" The pastor's gray eyes fixed on him with terrifying intensity. "Your son Thomas is very close to his own elevation." Samuel's world seemed to tilt. "How close?" "Perhaps tonight. Perhaps tomorrow. His spirit is already beginning to separate from his flesh." The whimper from Thomas's chamber came again, weaker this time. Samuel realized his son was dying, had been dying for weeks while these madmen called it spiritual purification. "I'm taking him home," Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Brother Matthias said. "You see, Brother Samuel, you've seen too much. You know too much about our sacred work." Pastor Thornfield nodded. "The doctrine of sacred silence requires that all witnesses either join us completely or be silenced themselves." Samuel's blood ran cold as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "You're going to kill me." "We're going to elevate you," Pastor Thornfield corrected. "Right here, right now, and then your son will join you in the eternal silence." The two pastors moved closer, and Samuel saw the madness gleaming in their eyes. He backed against the wall, his mind racing for a way out. "Wait," he said desperately. "If you kill me, people will notice. My wife, the neighbors, they'll come looking." Pastor Thornfield smiled. "Brother Samuel, you underestimate the reach of our network. We have believers in every town, every county. Sheriff Morrison in Fulton is one of our most devoted followers. His own son achieved elevation last month." Samuel felt the walls closing in. "Margaret won't believe I just disappeared." "Margaret won't have a choice," Brother Matthias said. "By tomorrow, the chapel in Mocaine will be hosting a very special service. The entire community will witness the final elevations needed to complete our sacred number, including your wife," Pastor Thornfield added. "She'll have the honor of achieving transcendence alongside her son." Samuel's vision blurred with rage. These monsters weren't just killing children, they were planning to massacre entire communities. "How many people are you planning to murder?" "Murder?" Pastor Thornfield looked genuinely puzzled. "Brother Samuel, we're not murderers. We're liberators. We're freeing these souls from the prison of flesh." Brother Matthias pulled a long knife from beneath his coat. "Your elevation will be swift and merciful, Brother Samuel. You'll be reunited with your son in the eternal silence." Samuel pressed his back against the wall, feeling the rough wood through his shirt. His hand brushed against something metal, a key ring hanging from a nail. Without thinking, he grabbed it and lunged toward his son's door. The key turned in the lock, and Samuel threw open the door to Thomas's chamber. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. His son lay on a thin mattress, his once chubby cheeks now hollow and gray. Thomas's eyes were closed, but his chest rose and fell with labored breathing. He was alive, but barely. "Thomas," Samuel whispered, dropping to his knees beside the boy. His son's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Samuel saw a spark of recognition. "Papa?" The word was barely a breath. "I'm here, son. I'm going to get you out of here." But Pastor Thornfield was already behind him, the knife gleaming in his hand. "It's too late, Brother Samuel. Your son is already between worlds. To move him now would trap his soul forever." Samuel scooped Thomas into his arms, feeling how light the boy had become. "We're leaving. Now." "I'm afraid not," Brother Matthias said, blocking the doorway. Samuel looked at his dying son, then at the two madmen who had orchestrated this horror. In that moment, he made a choice that would define the rest of his life. "Help!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. "Help us! They're killing children!" His voice echoed through the basement and up the stairs. Pastor Thornfield lunged with the knife, but Samuel dodged, still carrying Thomas. "There's no one to hear you," Brother Matthias said. "The entire town follows our doctrine." But Samuel kept screaming, kept fighting, kept holding his son, because even if they both died here, even if no one came to help, he would not let these monsters commit their atrocities in silence. Above them, the chapel door burst open, and footsteps thundered down the stairs. Samuel's heart leaped, until he saw who was coming. It was Sheriff Morrison, the man Pastor Thornfield had claimed was one of their followers. But the expression on the sheriff's face wasn't one of devotion. It was one of absolute horror. "Dear God," Sheriff Morrison whispered, looking at the basement full of locked doors. "What have you done?" Sheriff Morrison's hands shook as he took in the basement of horrors. His weathered face, marked by years of frontier justice, had never encountered anything like this. The smell of death and decay hung heavy in the air, mixed with the sickly sweet scent of incense that couldn't quite mask the underlying horror. "Sheriff Morrison," Pastor Thornfield said, his voice maintaining that unnatural calm. "You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's ceremony." The sheriff's hand moved to his pistol. "What ceremony? What in God's name is this place?" Samuel clutched Thomas closer, feeling his son's weak breathing against his chest. "Sheriff, these men have been murdering children, dozens of them. They've got them locked in these rooms, starving them to death." Now, Brother Samuel," Brother Matthias said, stepping forward. "Don't confuse the sheriff with your earthly interpretations. We've been conducting sacred work here." Sheriff Morrison's eyes moved from door to door, reading the names and ages carved into the wood. "Sarah Morrison. That's my daughter. She's been missing for 3 months." His voice cracked. "You told me she'd gone to stay with her aunt in Kansas City." "Sheriff Morrison," Pastor Thornfield said carefully, "your daughter achieved a beautiful elevation. She's in a better place now." The sheriff's pistol cleared leather faster than Samuel had ever seen. "Where is she?" Brother Matthias remained calm. "Sheriff, you've been one of our most devoted followers. Your donations have supported our sacred work. Surely you understand." "I donated money to help orphans," Morrison snarled. "You told me you were running an orphanage." "We are," Pastor Thornfield said. "An orphanage of the spirit. We take children burdened by earthly attachments and free them to join the eternal silence." Sheriff Morrison's face went white. "You're talking about murder. You're talking about murdering children." "We're talking about salvation," Brother Matthias corrected. "Sheriff, your daughter was chosen for a higher purpose. Her sacrifice, along with all the others, will open the pathway between worlds." The sheriff's gun wavered. "I want to see her. I want to see Sarah." Pastor Thornfield and Brother Matthias exchanged glances. "Sheriff, your daughter's earthly form is no longer suitable for viewing, but her spirit." "Show me," Morrison commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Samuel watched as the sheriff's world crumbled around him. He recognized the look in Morrison's eyes, the same desperate hope and growing horror that Samuel had felt when searching for Thomas. Brother Matthias sighed and moved to one of the doors. "Very well. But Sheriff, you must understand that what you're about to see is merely the discarded shell of your daughter's earthly existence. Her true self has been conducted away." The door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the basement like a death knell. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his pistol still drawn, and looked inside. The sound that came from his throat was barely human. Samuel had heard that sound before during the war. The sound a man makes when he sees something so terrible that words fail him. "Sarah," Morrison whispered, dropping to his knees. Samuel couldn't see into the room, but he could see the sheriff's face, and that was enough. The man aged 10 years in 10 seconds, his hair seeming to gray before Samuel's eyes. "She's been dead for weeks," Morrison said, his voice hollow. "Weeks. And you told me she was safe." "She is safe," Pastor Thornfield insisted. "Safer than she's ever been. Free from the corruption of flesh, free from the temptations of this world." Sheriff Morrison rose slowly, his pistol trained on Pastor Thornfield. You killed my little girl. We elevated her, Brother Matthias said. And Sheriff, you helped us do it. Your donations, your protection, your willingness to look the other way when families asked questions. I protected you because I thought you were helping children, Morrison roared. I turned away grieving parents because I thought their children were safe. Samuel saw his chance. Sheriff, there are children still alive in some of these rooms. We can save them. Morrison's eyes blazed with fury and determination. Open every door, now. Pastor Thornfield stepped forward. Sheriff, I cannot allow you to interfere with our sacred work. These children are days away from completing their journey to the eternal silence. Their journey to death, you mean? Morrison snarled. Death is just a transition, Brother Matthias said. Sheriff, you've seen the proof of our doctrine. You've witnessed the miracles we perform. Surely you understand that these children are chosen for something greater than ordinary life. The only thing I understand is that you're both insane, Morrison said, and you're both under arrest for murder. Pastor Thornfield smiled. I'm afraid that's not possible, Sheriff. You see, you're complicit in our work. You've taken our money, ignored our activities, turned away worried families. A jury would see you as an accessory to everything we've done. The sheriff's face went pale as he realized the trap he'd walked into. You planned this. We planned everything, Pastor Thornfield confirmed. The sacred silence doctrine requires complete commitment from all involved. There can be no witnesses, no loose ends. Samuel looked between the two men, holding his barely conscious son. Sheriff, it doesn't matter what they've made you complicit in. What matters is saving the children who are still alive. Morrison nodded, his jaw set with determination. You're right. He turned to the pastors. Give me the keys to these rooms. I'm afraid we can't do that, Brother Matthias said. You see, Sheriff, your role in our network is about to change. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open again, and more footsteps echoed down. Samuel's heart sank as he saw who was coming. 3 men in black coats, all carrying rifles. Brothers, Pastor Thornfield called out. Sheriff Morrison and Brother Samuel have seen too much. They require elevation. The men raised their weapons, and Samuel realized he was about to die in this basement of horrors, still holding his dying son. But Sheriff Morrison had other plans. With a speed that belied his age, he dove behind a wooden support beam, pulling Samuel and Thomas with him. His pistol barked twice, and 2 of the armed men fell. How many more? Morrison shouted over the gunfire. The whole town, Samuel replied grimly. They said the doctrine has spread throughout Missouri. Morrison's face hardened. Then we'll have to make our own justice. The 3rd gunman fired, and splinters of wood exploded from the beam above Samuel's head. Thomas stirred in his arms, his eyes fluttering open. Papa, the boy whispered. I'm scared. I know, son. I know, but we're going to get out of here. Sheriff Morrison reloaded his pistol with practiced efficiency. Samuel, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you take your boy and get out of here. Go straight to the marshal in Columbia. Tell him everything. What about the other children? I'll get them out. But first we need to stop these madmen from completing their ritual. Pastor Thornfield's voice echoed through the basement. Sheriff Morrison, Brother Samuel, there's no escape. The sacred silence has followers in every town, every county. Even if you flee Missouri, we'll find you. How many more children do you need? Samuel called out, stalling for time. 17, came the chilling reply. 17 more elevations and the pathway opens permanently. The living and the dead will exist in perfect silence. Samuel felt Thomas's grip tighten on his shirt. His son was listening, understanding the horror of their situation. Papa, Thomas whispered. The other children? They're not really dead. Samuel's blood ran cold. What do you mean? I can hear them, Thomas said, his voice barely audible. At night when it's quiet, I can hear them crying. They're trapped somewhere between sleeping and waking. Sheriff Morrison looked at the boy with new understanding. Son, are you saying these children are still alive somehow? Thomas nodded weakly. They're caught in the silence. They can't go forward, can't go back. The pastors, they're keeping them there. The implications hit Samuel like a physical blow. They're not just killing children, they're trapping their souls, the eternal silence. Morrison whispered. They're creating some kind of limbo. Pastor Thornfield's laughter echoed through the basement. Finally, you begin to understand. The sacred silence doctrine doesn't just elevate children, it creates a bridge between worlds. These children exist in perfect peace, free from the chaos of life but not lost to the void of death. You're creating an army of trapped souls, Samuel realized. We're creating a new form of existence, Brother Matthias corrected. And when we reach our sacred number, that existence will be available to all humanity. Sheriff Morrison's eyes blazed with fury. You're talking about enslaving the souls of children. We're talking about perfecting the human condition, Pastor Thornfield replied. No more pain, no more suffering, no more death, just eternal silence. The third gunman fired again, and Sheriff Morrison returned fire. The basement filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Samuel, Morrison said grimly, that boy of yours might be the key to stopping this. If he can hear the trapped children, maybe he can help us free them. Thomas stirred in Samuel's arms. Papa, there's something else. The pastors, they're not just men. There's something else inside them, something that whispers in the silence. Samuel's skin crawled. What kind of something? Something that feeds on trapped souls, Thomas whispered. Something that's been waiting a long time for enough children to open the door. The gunfire stopped abruptly, and the basement fell silent, except for the sound of labored breathing. Samuel could hear Pastor Thornfield and Brother Matthias whispering to each other, their voices carrying an otherworldly quality that made his skin crawl. Sheriff Morrison checked his ammunition. We need to get out of here and get help, but first we need to stop them from completing their ritual. How? Samuel asked. We destroy their records, Morrison said. Without knowing exactly how many children they've taken, they can't complete their sacred number. Thomas gripped Samuel's shirt tighter. Papa, the book. The pastor has a book with all the names. If we destroy it, the trapped souls might be freed. Samuel finished. Sheriff Morrison nodded. Then that's what we do. We get that book, we destroy it, and we make sure these monsters never hurt another child. The basement fell silent as the three survivors, a desperate father, a broken sheriff, and a dying child, prepared to face the forces of darkness that had consumed their community. The silence in the basement stretched like a living thing, heavy with the weight of trapped souls and whispered prayers. Samuel held Thomas close, feeling his son's heartbeat, weak but steady, against his chest. Sheriff Morrison crouched beside them, his weathered hands steady on his pistol despite the horror of what they discovered. The book, Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. I can feel it. It's not just names, Papa. It's pieces of their souls, written in their own blood. Samuel's stomach lurched. What do you mean? When they take the children, Thomas explained, his young voice carrying wisdom no child should possess, they make them write their names in the book. But the ink, it's not ink. It's their blood, mixed with something else, something that binds them to the silence. Sheriff Morrison's jaw tightened. Where is this book? The altar upstairs, Thomas said, hidden inside a false bottom. But Sheriff, there are others coming. I can hear them. As if summoned by Thomas's words, the sound of horses' hooves echoed from outside the chapel. Multiple riders, approaching fast. The other pastors, Samuel realized. They're gathering for the final ritual. Pastor Thornfield's voice drifted down from the chapel above. Brother Matthias, prepare the remaining children. Our colleagues have arrived for the culmination of our sacred work. Sheriff Morrison peered around the wooden beam. The third gunman lay motionless on the basement floor, but the two pastors had retreated upstairs, taking their remaining weapons with them. We need to get to that book, Morrison said. But first we need to free any children who are still alive. Samuel looked at the rows of locked doors, each one a testament to the horror they'd uncovered. How many do you think are still breathing? Thomas would know, Morrison said, looking at the boy with a mixture of respect and sorrow. Son, can you tell us which children are still alive? Thomas closed his eyes and Samuel felt him shiver. 17, he whispered. 17 children still breathing, still trapped between worlds. But Papa, they're fading fast. The pastors are preparing to conduct them away tonight. The sound of voices echoed from the chapel above. Samuel counted at least 6 different men, all speaking in hushed tones about the final elevation and opening the pathway. We're outnumbered, Morrison said grimly. "But we have surprise on our side. They think we're trapped down here." "What's the plan?" Samuel asked. Morrison's eyes hardened with determination. "You and Thomas stay here, free as many children as you can." "I'm going up to get that book. Sheriff, that's suicide. There are at least 6 of them up there." "Maybe," Morrison said, "but I've got justice on my side, and I've got nothing left to lose." He looked at Samuel with eyes that had seen too much. "My Sarah is dead because I trusted these monsters. I won't let them claim another child." Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of guilt that drove the sheriff. "Be careful up there." Morrison moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Samuel, if I don't make it back, if those bastards kill me, you take every child you can carry and you run. Don't look back." "Sheriff." "Promise me," Morrison said firmly. "Promise me you won't let them complete their ritual." Samuel looked down at Thomas, then at the rows of locked doors. "I promise." Morrison disappeared up the stairs, his footsteps barely audible on the wooden planks. Samuel could hear muffled voices from the chapel above, growing more animated as the pastors prepared for their final ceremony. "Papa," Thomas whispered. "The keys. Brother Matthias dropped them when the shooting started." Samuel looked around and spotted the key ring near the fallen gunman. He gently set Thomas down despite the boy's weak protests and retrieved the keys. "Which rooms first?" Samuel asked. Thomas pointed to 3 doors close together. "Mary Sullivan, James Morrison, and little Lucy Henderson. They're the strongest if we can wake them." Samuel unlocked the first door and pushed it open. The smell that hit him was overwhelming, a mixture of human waste, decay, and something else. Something sweet and cloying that made his head spin. Mary Sullivan lay on a thin mattress, her once blonde hair now gray and matted. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, but her face held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much suffering. "Mary," Samuel whispered, kneeling beside her. "Mary, can you hear me?" The little girl's eyes fluttered open, but they seemed to look through him rather than at him. "I'm in the silence," she whispered. "I can't leave the silence." "Yes, you can," Samuel said firmly. "We're going to get you out of here." But when he tried to lift her, Mary began to convulse, her back arching as if something was trying to keep her in place. From her throat came a sound that wasn't quite human, a keening wail that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. "She's bound to this place," Thomas said weakly. "The ritual, it's not complete, but she's already partially in the silence." Samuel felt a chill of understanding. "The book. That's why we need the book. It's not just a record, it's what's keeping them trapped." From upstairs came the sound of gunfire, followed by shouts and running footsteps. Sheriff Morrison was making his move. "Papa, hurry," Thomas urged. "The other pastors are here. Brother Josiah from Columbia, Pastor Mordecai from Jefferson City. They're all here for the final ceremony." Samuel moved to the next door, his hand shaking as he unlocked it. James Morrison, the sheriff's son, lay in a similar state, his young body wasted away to almost nothing. "James," Samuel whispered. "Your father's here. He's come to save you." The boy's eyes opened, but like Mary, he seemed to be looking at something beyond the physical world. "The silence is beautiful," he whispered. "It doesn't hurt in the silence." Samuel's heart broke as he realized what these children had been through. They weren't just dying, they were being slowly separated from their own souls, conditioned to accept the silence as preferable to the pain of living. The third door revealed Lucy Henderson, Ruth's youngest daughter. She was barely 5 years old, but her eyes held an ancient sadness that no child should ever carry. "Lucy, honey," Samuel said gently. "Your mama is looking for you. Ruth is so worried." Lucy's lips moved, but no sound came out. Samuel leaned closer and realized she was mouthing the same words over and over. The flesh must be silenced. The spirit must be conducted away. A crash from upstairs made Samuel look up. The gunfire had stopped, but he could hear heavy footsteps moving across the chapel floor. "Samuel Whitmore," came Pastor Thornfield's voice from the top of the stairs. "You and the boy need to come up here, now." Samuel looked at Thomas, then at the 3 children he'd found. They were alive, but barely. And more importantly, they seemed to be caught between worlds, unable to fully return to the living. "We're not coming up," Samuel called back. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice," Pastor Thornfield replied. "You see, Sheriff Morrison is up here with us. He's still alive, but his condition is negotiable." Samuel's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I want you to witness the completion of our sacred work," came the reply. "You and your son are going to be part of the final ceremony. The last 2 souls needed to reach our sacred number." Thomas gripped Samuel's arm. "Papa, the book." "Sheriff Morrison, he got the book." Samuel looked at his son in surprise. "How do you know?" "I can feel it," Thomas whispered. "The binding is broken. The souls are starting to wake up." As if to confirm his words, Mary Sullivan suddenly sat up, her eyes clearing for the first time in months. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse but human. James Morrison was stirring too, and little Lucy Henderson had begun to cry. Not the keening wail of the trapped, but the normal tears of a frightened child. "The book," Samuel breathed. "Morrison destroyed the book." "Not destroyed," Thomas corrected. "Hidden. He hid it somewhere they can't find it." "But Papa, they're going to try to start over. They're going to try to bind new souls." The implications hit Samuel like a physical blow. "They're going to kill everyone in the chapel tonight." "Everyone," Thomas confirmed. "The entire congregation. They're going to bind all their souls at once to complete the ritual." Samuel looked at the 3 children who were slowly returning to consciousness but were still too weak to walk. He couldn't carry them all, couldn't save them all. "Thomas," he said quietly, "you said you can hear the trapped souls. Can you help free them?" Thomas nodded weakly. "I think so. But Papa, I don't think I can come back from the silence. I've been there too long." Samuel's heart shattered. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Thomas said with a sad smile, "that I can free the other children, but I'll have to stay in the silence to keep the pathway closed. Someone has to guard it from the other side." "No," Samuel said firmly. "There has to be another way." "Papa," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger despite his physical weakness, "this is what I'm supposed to do. This is why I didn't die like the others. I was meant to be the guardian." From upstairs came the sound of chanting. The pastors were beginning their final ritual, and Samuel knew they were running out of time. "There has to be another way," Samuel repeated. But even as he said it, he could see in Thomas's eyes that his son had already made his choice. The children needed a guardian in the silence, someone to keep them safe from the forces that fed on trapped souls. And Thomas, who had spent weeks existing between worlds, was the only one who could do it. "I love you, Papa," Thomas said quietly. "Tell Mama I love her too." Samuel held his son close, feeling the boy's spirit beginning to separate from his physical form. "I love you too, son. More than life itself." Thomas closed his eyes and began to whisper words in a language Samuel didn't recognize. The air in the basement began to shimmer, and Samuel could hear the sound of children's voices, not crying but singing. A gentle, beautiful song that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The trapped souls were being freed, but Thomas was taking their place as the guardian of the silence, the one who would keep the pathway closed forever. The basement of the Reformed Quietist Chapel filled with an otherworldly light as Thomas began his transformation. Samuel held his son close, feeling the boy's physical form growing lighter while his spirit grew stronger. The children in the nearby rooms were stirring, their souls finally freed from the binding that had kept them trapped between worlds. "Papa," Thomas whispered, his voice carrying an echo that seemed to come from vast distances. "I can see them all 266 children. They're ready to go home." Samuel's heart clenched. 266? But the pastors said. "They lied," Thomas said with a sad smile. "They've been taking children for longer than anyone knew. Some of the souls have been trapped for years waiting for someone to free them." The chanting from upstairs grew louder, more urgent. Samuel could hear Pastor Thornfield's voice rising above the others, calling out in that same unknown language Thomas had been speaking. "The final 17, Thomas continued, his form beginning to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. "They're trying to bind the congregation upstairs. Men, women, children, everyone who came for the service tonight." Samuel's blood ran cold. "How many people are up there?" 37, Thomas replied. "If they succeed, they'll have enough souls to tear the barrier between worlds completely." The silence won't just be a prison, it'll be a doorway for things that should never enter our world. The implications hit Samuel like a physical blow. What kinds of things? Thomas's eyes, still his son's eyes, but filled with knowledge no child should possess, met his. The things that whisper to the pastors. The things that feed on trapped souls. Papa, Pastor Thornfield, and the others. They're not just madmen. They're vessels for something much worse. A scream echoed from the chapel above, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Someone was trying to escape, but the heavy chapel doors slammed shut with a finality that made Samuel's skin crawl. "They've locked everyone in," Thomas said. "The binding ritual has begun." Samuel looked at his son, then at the children in the nearby rooms who were slowly regaining consciousness. Mary Sullivan was sitting up, her eyes clearing but still weak. James Morrison was trying to stand, his legs shaking from months of confinement. Little Lucy Henderson was crying, but they were human tears now, not the keening wails of the trapped. "Thomas," Samuel said desperately, "there has to be another way. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to save them." "Yes, I do," Thomas replied gently. "Papa, I've been in the silence. I've seen what it's like. The children there, they're not suffering anymore, they're at peace. But they need someone to protect them from the things that hunt in the space between worlds." The light around Thomas grew brighter, and Samuel could see through his son's form to the wall behind him. The transformation was accelerating. "But what about your life?" Samuel asked, tears streaming down his face. "What about growing up, getting married, having children of your own?" Thomas's smile was infinitely sad but also infinitely peaceful. "Papa, I've seen what I would have become. I've seen the man I could have been, but I've also seen what happens if I don't do this. The silence spreads, more children are taken, more souls are trapped. Eventually the barrier breaks completely and the things that live in the silence come into our world." From upstairs came another scream, this one cut short as if the person had been suddenly silenced. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. "They're killing the congregation," Samuel realized. "Not killing," Thomas corrected. "Binding. Trapping their souls just like they did with the children." "But Papa, Sheriff Morrison..." "He's still alive, he's fighting them." Samuel looked toward the stairs. "I should help him." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You should help the children. Get them out of here, take them to safety." "I can't carry them all," Samuel protested. "You won't have to," Thomas said with a smile. "Watch." The light around Thomas suddenly expanded, flowing into the nearby rooms where the bound children lay. Samuel watched in amazement as the children began to stir, their strength returning as Thomas's spirit touched theirs. Mary Sullivan stood up, her legs steady for the first time in months. James Morrison pushed himself to his feet, his father's determination blazing in his young eyes. Little Lucy Henderson stopped crying and looked around with clear, intelligent eyes. "The Guardian has freed us," Mary said, her voice carrying the same otherworldly echo as Thomas's. "We can walk again." "But not for long," Thomas added, his form now more light than substance. "The binding is broken, but the children are still weak. They need to get far away from here before the pastors realize what's happening." Samuel looked at his son, then at the children gathering around them. "Thomas, I can't leave you here. You're not leaving me," Thomas said gently. "I'm staying to protect the children in the silence. And Papa, I'll be protecting you too, all of you. The pastors won't be able to hurt anyone ever again." The chanting upstairs reached a crescendo, and Samuel heard Pastor Thornfield's voice rising above the others. "The pathway opens. The silence receives us all. It's time," Thomas said. "Papa, you have to go. Now." Samuel knelt beside his son, or what remained of him. "I love you, Thomas. I'm so proud of you." "I love you too, Papa. Tell Mama. Tell her I'm not gone. I'm just somewhere else, keeping watch." Thomas placed his hand on Samuel's forehead, and suddenly Samuel could see what his son saw. A vast space between worlds, filled with the spirits of children who had been trapped by the pastor's ritual. But they weren't suffering anymore. They were at peace, protected by guardians who kept the darkness at bay. "There are others," Samuel breathed. "Other guardians. Children like me," Thomas confirmed. "Children who chose to stay behind to protect the others. We're not alone, Papa. We're never alone." The light around Thomas began to fade, but his presence remained. A warm, protective feeling that filled the basement with comfort instead of fear. "Go," Thomas whispered, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Take the children and go. Sheriff Morrison is waiting for you by the back door." Samuel looked around and saw that the basement was full of children. Not just the 3 he'd found, but dozens of others, all freed from their binding. They were weak but mobile, their eyes clear and human. "How is this possible?" Samuel asked. "Love," came Thomas's voice from the air around them. "Love is stronger than any binding. Love can break any chain." Samuel gathered the children around him, marveling at how they seemed to move as one, guided by some invisible force. As they climbed the stairs, he could hear the continuing chaos in the chapel. Shouts, screams, and the sound of breaking wood. At the top of the stairs, Samuel peered into the chapel and saw a scene from a nightmare. The congregation was arranged in a circle around the altar, but they weren't moving. They stood perfectly still, their eyes closed, their faces blank. Pastor Thornfield and the other pastors were chanting in the center of the circle, their voices creating a harmony that made Samuel's teeth ache. But in the back of the chapel, Sheriff Morrison was fighting his way toward the rear exit, a leather-bound book clutched in his hands. His face was bloody, his clothes torn, but his eyes blazed with determination. "This way," Samuel whispered to the children, leading them along the wall toward the back door. They were almost there when Pastor Thornfield's voice cut through the chanting. "The children, the bound souls have been freed." The pastors spun around, their eyes wide with shock and rage. Samuel saw something else in their faces, something that wasn't quite human, something that spoke of vast hungers and ancient hatreds. "Run!" Sheriff Morrison shouted, throwing open the back door. Samuel and the children burst out into the cool night air, with Morrison close behind. The sound of pursuit echoed from the chapel, but as they ran, Samuel heard Thomas's voice one last time. "The pathway is closed, Papa. The silence is sealed. They can't follow you now." Samuel looked back at the chapel and saw it beginning to glow with the same otherworldly light that had surrounded Thomas. The building seemed to be fading, becoming translucent, existing in more than one world at once. "What's happening?" Morrison gasped as they ran. "My son," Samuel said, tears streaming down his face. "My son is saving us all." Behind them, the chapel continued to fade until it was nothing more than a shimmer in the air. The pastors' voices became distant echoes, and then silence fell over the Missouri countryside. Samuel stopped running and turned back. Where the chapel had stood, there was now only an empty field, but in the center of that field, barely visible in the moonlight, was a small gravestone that hadn't been there before. "Thomas Whitmore," Samuel read aloud, "beloved son and guardian of the silence." Sheriff Morrison placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "He saved them all. Every child they took, every soul they trapped, he set them free." Samuel nodded, unable to speak. Around them, the freed children were beginning to remember who they were, calling out for their parents, their families. Some had been missing for weeks, others for months, or even years. "What do we tell people?" Morrison asked. "How do we explain what happened here?" Samuel looked at the empty field where the chapel had stood, then at the children who were slowly returning to life. "We tell them the truth, that evil tried to take root in Missouri, but it was stopped by the sacrifice of a brave child who chose to protect others rather than save himself." "And the pastors?" "Trapped in their own silence," Samuel said. "Thomas made sure they can never hurt anyone again." As dawn broke over the Missouri countryside, Samuel began the long journey home to Margaret, carrying with him the memory of his son's sacrifice and the knowledge that Thomas was still out there, somewhere between worlds, standing guard against the darkness. The Reformed Quietist chapels were found empty the next morning, their doors standing open to reveal nothing but dust and echoes. No bodies were ever found, no evidence of the horrors that had taken place within their walls. But sometimes, on quiet nights in Missouri, parents would tuck their children into bed and whisper a prayer of thanks to Thomas Whitmore, the guardian of the silence, who gave his life to protect the innocent and ensure that such evil could never again take root in their land. And in the space between worlds, Thomas kept his eternal watch, surrounded by the children he had saved, ensuring that the pathway between the living and the dead remained forever sealed. Epilogue: The Hidden Diary. 6 months later, Margaret Whitmore knelt in the small cemetery outside Mocane, placing fresh wildflowers on the grave that had mysteriously appeared after that terrible night. The headstone was simple, bearing only her son's name and the words "Guardian of the Silence." Samuel had told her everything about the Reformed Quietist chapels, about the children who had been taken, about Thomas's sacrifice. Some nights, she still woke up crying, mourning the life her son would never have. But other nights, she felt a warm presence in the room, a sense of peace that could only come from knowing that Thomas was still watching over them. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Margaret looked up to see a young woman approaching, her face kind but marked by the same sort of loss that Margaret carried. "I'm Sarah Morrison," the woman said. "Sheriff Morrison's daughter. I wanted to thank you." Margaret stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Thank me?" "For what your son did," Sarah said simply. "I was one of the children in the chapel. I was trapped in the silence for 3 months. Thomas, he saved me. He saved all of us." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry for what you went through." "Don't be sorry," Sarah said. "What I went through led to something beautiful. Your son didn't just save our lives, he saved our souls. And Mrs. Whitmore, he's not gone. Not really." "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled, and for a moment Margaret saw something of Thomas in her expression. "Sometimes when the world is very quiet, we can hear him. All of us who were saved, we can hear him singing in the silence, keeping watch." Margaret's heart skipped. "You can hear him?" "We all can," Sarah confirmed. "And Mrs. Whitmore, he wants you to know that he's happy, he's at peace, and he's exactly where he's supposed to be." Margaret knelt again and placed her hand on Thomas's headstone. The stone was warm under her palm, warmer than it should have been on such a cool autumn day. "I love you, my brave boy," she whispered. And somewhere in the space between worlds, Thomas Whitmore heard his mother's words and smiled, knowing that love truly was stronger than any binding, any silence, any darkness that might try to separate the living from those they cherished. The Missouri Doctrine had been defeated, but the love that conquered it would endure forever.